Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jodi Kerr, Director of Nursing the Future, and I want to welcome you to our second masterclass series, The State of Nursing in Canada. This particular episode addresses the challenges nurses face every day in practice, and that's to uphold their clinical practice standards and optimize the care that they deliver in this obviously very stressed and highly limited healthcare system. In the book, The Promise of Paradox, Parker Palmer, a great educator and activist, claimed that vocation does not come from willfulness, it comes from listening. I must listen to my life and try to understand what it is truly about, quite apart from what I would like it to be about, or my life will never represent anything real in the world, no matter how earnest my intentions. You know, Parker spent a lot of time with Thomas Merton, himself a world-renowned social activist and philosopher, and could be found reiterating his claim that a full life is one that, if we can find the courage, situates us within the mess itself, its realities, inevitable disappointments, unpredictable challenges, surprising supports and resources, and creative dynamics. Nursing practice today is like that. So how do we prepare nurses to serve humanity with knowledge, intuition, and intellect while managing the social, cultural, political, and economic forces that both support and limit the practice we're capable of providing? Today, I have with me an outstanding group of scholars, direct care leaders, administrators, and visionaries who will share their perspectives on a host of grassroots issues facing nurses today. So let me introduce them. Sara Fung is an experienced healthcare thought leader, author, advocate, speaker, and consultant. Sara has worked as a nurse for close to 20 years and has held a variety of roles at the frontline, leadership, and entrepreneurial levels. Her expertise is in maternal-child health with clinical experience in obstetrics and the NICU. She's worked in academic and community hospitals and in home health as a bedside nurse educator and advanced practice nurse. Sara is a co-host of the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you haven't seen it, you better. It's number 2 on Apple Podcasts in the medical category. And Sara is the best-selling author of The Wisdom of Nurses, Stories of Grit from the Front Lines. Sara's done a wide range of media interviews for major Canadian news outlets such as CBC and accepted speaking engagements for organizations like the Canadian Medical Association, Sigma Nursing, and the Canadian Nurses Association. Sara's on the board of directors at Hong Fook Mental Health Association and the research advisory board at the Conference Board of Canada and Making the Move, helping skilled newcomers of African descent secure meaningful career opportunities in Canada. Sara's company, the RN Resume, was a 2024 nominee for a Young Entrepreneur Award from the Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. Congratulations, Sara. Satvir is an internationally educated nurse currently practicing as a registered nurse on a medical surgical unit in Windsor, Ontario. Satvir Kaur, shortly after graduating with her bachelor's degree in nursing from Baba Farid University of Health Sciences in Punjab in 2016, she set out for Canada to pursue higher studies, graduating with a Master's of Nursing from Thomson University with a focus on the resilience of newly graduated nurses transitioning to practice. And that's how I met Satvir. Satvir is passionate about the issues related to new graduate nurses and their transition to practice experience. She herself has just been a nurse of 1 year. I think it's today. So we're excited to celebrate alongside Satvir. Another very dear friend, Jodi Kerr, has been a registered nurse since 2006. Can't believe that, Jodi, when she earned her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from the University of Saskatchewan. Jodi was born and raised in Regina, Saskatchewan, and credits her parents, Frank and Sharon, for the full life she leads today. Having known Jodi from the time she was a young nursing student, I can attest to the love, kindness, and great sense of humor that they passed down to Jodi. No doubt it's served as a buffer for the trials of leadership over the years, right, Jodi? Prior to nursing, Jodi was a sign language interpreter, earning her certificate in American Sign Language in Edmonton, Alberta, and practicing as an interpreter for the Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. But her heart was in nursing. Jodi graduated from the nursing program of Saskatchewan in 2006 and quickly became part of the leadership team for Nursing the Future, holding many positions during the 4 years that she was part of our amazing team. Jodi says her time with NTF was one of the best times of her life, but honestly, her joy and sense of humor kept us all afloat. Jodi transitioned to practice on the neurosciences ward of the Regina General Hospital, functioning in the roles of primary care nurse, charge, and clinical resource nurse up to January 2014, when she accepted the position of unit manager of neurosciences and continues to be inspired by the nurses that show up every day and provide the best care to their patients and families. Don Leidl is an assistant professor at the University of New Brunswick Faculty of Nursing. His clinical background is in mental health and addictions nursing, primarily in the clinical areas of inpatient adult acute psychiatry, psychiatric emergency department services for adults and adolescents, and forensic mental health nursing. Don holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Saskatchewan, a Master of Nursing from Athabasca University, and a Doctorate of Education from the University of Liverpool in 2016. He's the lead researcher in extended reality teaching modalities and the use of technologies in nursing education at the University of New Brunswick Faculty of Nursing. His current research portfolio is focused on the use of immersive virtual reality technologies in nursing and health sciences education. Don is a passionate mental health nursing educator and researcher, and currently serves as the president of the Canadian Federation on Mental Health Nurses. He's also the former lead researcher of the Northern Nurse Education Network, an international research collaborative affiliated with the U-Arctic, with the goal of leveraging advanced technologies to build healthcare capacity in the circumpolar north. Don resides with his family in Moncton, New Brunswick, and apparently is spending the first Christmas in the East, and looks forward to that, sitting down by a fire, I'm hoping, with some eggnog. Dawn, sounds lovely. And finally, Angela Wignall is a registered nurse who practices at the intersection of policy and governance. As the current Chief Executive Officer of the Nurses and Nurse Practitioners of British Columbia, Angela holds a BA from York University, a BSN from the University of Victoria, a Master's in Policy and Practice, and is currently completing her PhD with a research focus on state-level health policy coalitions. She's a member of Canada's CNO Advisory Committee on Nursing Retention and chairs the International Council of Nurses, PAHO region, and global GNLI alumni policy tables. Angela advises and speaks around the world on nurse-led innovation, clinical governance, policy science, and healthcare transformation. So you can see that although we have a daunting task ahead today, we're clearly in good hands. So let's let the dialogue begin. We're better to start than with the elephant in the room, and that would be, how do nurses optimize care in a competence task-driven system with clear fiscal and resource limitations? We all know that the newest members of our profession are, as a colleague of mine recently put it, leaving by the bucketful. And it seems that they're leaving because of an alarming, at least to them, set of discrepancies between what they thought would be their role and their responsibilities as clinical nurses and what they find themselves tasked with when they enter practice. Secondly, the level of stress inherent in the workplace to which their colleagues have adapted. And finally, the perpetual lack of resources, both staff and supplies, that make practicing as competent and compassionate nursing professionals difficult and sometimes unsatisfying. So Sara, I'd like to begin with you. And the question is, how do we advance a professional nursing agenda that's patient, family, and community focused and grounded in the most current clinical evidence, but within an environment that's fraught with a lack of resources that extends from staff to supplies? How do we balance the operational needs and fiscal limitations of our institutions with the clinical practice goals of our profession?
Judy, that's a great question. And I think just going back to my days as a new grad nurse, one of the first terms I learned when I got onto the floor was short staffing. So I don't think this is a new term. I do think that throughout the pandemic, it certainly magnified the problem and made it worse. But I do think that short of being able to change the budget allotted to healthcare, I think there are certain things that we can do at a grassroots level. And one of them is really empowering leaders at all levels of the organization. And whether or not nurses believe it, we are all leaders in some way. It may be formal or informal, but we all are leaders. And I think empowering leaders to lead at all levels is really important because regardless of the number of years experience you have, we all have something we can bring to the table in terms of ideas to how to use resources more effectively. So that's one thing I would suggest. The other is just being proactive, right? I think that a lot of times we wait until things get bad before we think of solutions. And I think we're at a point now in healthcare where we really have to think ahead as to worst case scenario, there could be another pandemic. Are we prepared? Have we learned enough from the first one to be proactive and really put things in place for if this is going to happen again? And in terms of staffing, in terms of resource allocation, I think these are all important things to do. I also think it's really important to create and maintain a culture of psychological safety. So a lot of times the answers are there, the people are there, but they're afraid to speak up. And for various different reasons, we often have the ideas, but people are not empowered enough to voice them or to act on them. And then the last thing I would say is just really collaborating, not just within our profession or within our organizations, but even looking outside of the profession and how other industries have been able to effectively use the resources, however limited they are, to still be able to deliver whatever service it is and maintain the quality of care that we know patients deserve.
Yeah, really, really outstanding points, Sarah. Satvir, I'm curious. When we talk about leadership with senior students, which I don't agree with this, but we teach it in the last term of their undergraduate program, which quite frankly, they're like nowhere near thinking about leadership at that point. But this idea that you are, if you're not a leader in any other way, you're certainly a clinical leader and you're an example to the colleagues that you work with. And I mean, there were many times when I would have students in clinical and they would know something, right, because they're right there with the latest evidence that the senior nurses didn't know. So again, that's a way of being a leader in practice. But Satvir, how how do you see it as a new grad, having already been through the first year, which is the most difficult? Would you say you were a leader in practice? And what's your comment when someone says all of us are leaders?
I think like I agree with Sarah in terms of like even when you act as an advocate for your patient, right? Like a patient advocacy and speaking up for your patients sometimes like when physicians they don't because physicians are not there 24 hours but when you're there for a patient for 12 hours you are the thing and then sometimes you get the but then you're also trying to maintain that level where you don't want to tell exactly what the physician is saying so you're like trying to balance things out. I think we act as leaders in that moment in terms of like taking that role of an patient advocate. And I also agree with her points of because I've written them being proactive and not reactive, which I call it, because why does it always happen that once we have like an event that the report was written or somebody has to fill a workload form in order for them to follow up with you when the patient acuity is already known to the management or the people who are like arranging stuff. Why it is always like there's an event, it happens, then we react to it, and then we're like giving you support for 2 days, you look at the helping hands, and then okay, after that, let's go back to normal. Like it needs to stop. Like it's just like this is like like giving a kid the candy and then pulling it away and be like okay now that like settling down and now okay we're going to pull back the help again, now you're going to drown again, now we're going to wait for something else the serious is going to happen, then like a bunch of reports are going to be filed and then we will give help for 1 week and then we'll pull it away. Like I don't like that. Like it's just not productive, that's also contributing to the more burnout, because then people are afraid of bringing those concerns. They are not speaking about the issues. They're like, because then like nurses start feeling like, what's the point? That it's not a, because we're looking for a more of a systemic change rather than like a, putting out the fire kind of situation. But right now what's happening is we're just putting out fires, but not willing, I don't know, maybe they're willing to, but like not fixing the root cause, or like looking at it as a whole systemic change. Like the system needs to change if we want things to work better in the future, because this is not us getting prepared for the future. Like she said, like, we don't know if there's going to be another pandemic.
Oh, absolutely bang on points. Absolutely bang on points, Satvir. I think about, we talk about the paradox, right? That's what we're talking about today. And so we tell students and we tell our nurses, when you see something, report it and talk to us, right, Jodi? And we're going to change that. But then we set you up into a system where the very reporting mechanism that we're asking you to do is prohibitive. Like, I know that nurses don't fill out those reports because they don't have time to fill out those reports. So that's a system issue, as you've identified, Satvir. Wonderful points about system issues. And that brings me to you, Angela. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how you respond to this idea of how we advance our agenda in these dichotomous situations.
Thanks, Jodi, and thanks for the great points, Satvir and Sara. I really do agree with both of what my colleagues have shared. And I think I'll add in that we work within systems that are performing as designed. I really resist this idea that these systems are broken and that they are failing. No, they are performing exactly as designed. And the really difficult truth of these systems is that they weren't designed for us. They are not nursing purpose-built systems. And when we think about the broad structures we work within, who were they designed for? They were primarily designed for our fantastic and wonderful physician colleagues. Our electronic health records, our EMRs, were designed with those practices in mind. Our hospital-based systems were established and designed with those philosophies, methods of care, and approaches. And until we get to a point where we are recognizing that the largest workforce on the planet is not being served by those systems in a meaningful way, and we can have a real conversation of what it will take to transform those systems to be purpose-built for nursing, I don't think we're going to see an end to this conundrum. One of my favorite, books that I like to show my students when I teach is a book from 1999 that's literally titled "The Nursing Crisis and Nursing Shortage. What are we going to do?" Nursing's not been blind to this problem for decades. We've been writing about it, researching it for literally decades. And as Sara really appropriately noted, it hasn't shifted and it hasn't budged. And while I do think there are things that we need to do, for example, I'm very proud to have been part of creating the National Nursing Retention Toolkit, and specifically my area of focus on clinical governance and shared governance, which is what we need to enable nurses to lead nursing, because that's what we practice. We practice nursing. But there is also part of our profession that needs to get involved in this. And I worry sometimes, as nursing writ large in Canada, that we continue to see ourselves as a workforce to be deployed and to allow the kinds of operational pressures that our leaders across the country are facing to shape our discipline, when in fact we are responsible for our profession. We are responsible for our discipline, and ensuring that when we educate nurses, we're doing so in a way that gets real about the realities of practice today, which are crushing and difficult, but nurses are still showing up to because we are amazing and resilient and capable people. And also practice environments that are ready for the things we need, which isn't just money, it's resources, it's safety, it's continuing professional development. And until we assert those needs as a united voice, as a profession, and refuse to allow ourselves to be deployed as widgets, I'm not sure we're going to get where we need to go.
Powerful. I want you in my corner, Angela. I know that for sure.
Thanks, Judy.
Seriously, beautifully said. Okay, so if we take that idea, that, you know, it's so interesting because even when I was a manager in Saskatchewan, which by the way had the best, absolutely best safety system I have ever seen or heard of, and I'm not sure, Jodi, if you guys are applying it in Regina, but in Saskatoon we had a safety system where, you know, you didn't have to fill out forms. You phoned a line and you talked to an actual person who went through a series of questions. It was quick. They typed everything. You just said whatever happened, and then you said goodbye. And I, as a manager, got that report within hours, and within 24 hours, I needed to have acted on that, and I needed to have demonstrated that I acted on it. So that sort of aside, this idea that we can't keep doing these things that perpetuate and support the very system we're arguing needs to change. So, you know, another example from my managerial days was I would say to the nurses, you know, unless we're in an incredible pickle, I don't want you, unless someone's dying and you have to take care of them, I don't want you to work a 16-hour shift or a whatever shift. Simply say you cannot do it. And eventually, if I'm the administrator on call, I'll get a message that I can't staff my unit, and I'll have to deal with that. This is not and shouldn't be on the backs of the nurses, right? But they take that on. And so, Angela, if we think about that, where you're kind of almost roped in sometimes as a nurse to responding to a situation in a way that you think, this isn't helping, but you have to do it anyway. What kinds of things might we be able to do as you've identified that can disrupt that system?
I think Sarah, you know, really appropriately pointed to the reality of the way we conceptualize leadership, right? So we often think of leading in systems as somebody's job. So for example, I carry a title that people presume is synonymous with leadership. But I do agree with Sarah that nurses lead everywhere, wherever they are. And for me, as a policy scientist who became a nurse, I always find it really interesting when nurses, particularly those engaged in the clinical domain of practice, say, how do I get involved in policy? How do I take the next steps in disrupting public discourse or changing the narratives? And I have the great privilege of saying, good news, you're doing it already. When you are at the bedside and it's 2 a.m. and you are removing a chest tube and you haven't done it in 2 years and you're trying to remember, how do I do this? And you're recalling your clinical and your nursing knowledge, you're going to your employer policies around a practice, you're interfacing with the evidence through tools like Elsevier or others, you are engaging in the intersection of policy and governance work. You're doing that work already. And you're doing that through the lens of your nursing knowledge. You're doing that through the lens of clinical reasoning and clinical judgment. And all of those skills are absolutely the same skills that we need to be able to disrupt systems. We need critical thinking. We need the capacity to work between systems, work interprofessionally and collaboratively across systems. We need intense and meaningful relational skills, which nursing is superb at. In fact, I would say we're one of the best professions in our relational practices. And so, you know, we as nurses, we have a toolkit that is purpose-built for this kind of work, that's ready to go. And I think part of what we need to do is see ourselves as powerful, because we are, and be prepared for really difficult conversations when we disrupt the perception of who nurses are in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that. I just think about, you know, a new grad or an early career nurse who, you know, one of their main objectives is to belong, right? One of their main objectives is to be liked, and respect. The desire for that comes a little bit later. Right now, I just want to be part of this professional environment. And so the chances that, like, I love the concept of being a disruptor, but actually being a disruptor, that takes a lot of courage. And sometimes it's not overly welcome. Jodi, I just want to open this to you for a second because when I was a manager, it was hard to deal with disruptors as much as you love them, and that we need to disrupt this. The problem is we're all so busy and the system is just a machine. It's rolling. So if I disrupt it, I disrupt a lot of other things that might be working well. What's your comment, Jodi?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think too, like you had mentioned, Angela, and even just thinking about, Satvir as her in the first year, I think it also depends heavily too on the type of personality that you have, right? I think that it is, first of all the things that are overwhelming when you're first in nursing, really regardless of whether it's your first year or even year 5, I think that it really does depend how that person, the confidence I think that they have just in themselves, either to be that person, to use your voice, to advocate, and to not maybe be a little bit afraid of whatever the consequence might be, but to know that that's the right thing to do. That's a tough thing to do when, even when you're a confident, extroverted person, it's tough to have those, to use your voice in a real, empowering way and feel that you're making a difference, when I think there's so many things that are against us when we want to be that person that advocates and to really speak up and have our voice be heard. It's a tough thing to do.
It's a tough thing to do. Jodi, you make it so clear, and I think we understand what you're saying, that it's our responsibility and we have to have the courage to do it, even if it's hard. Now, what I sometimes tell grads is it's better if there's just more than you. So if you can find somebody in the environment that feels the same way that you do, gather your forces with those individuals and approach the manager with some kind of a solution, because it doesn't help to disrupt things if you don't have an idea of the way it ought to look. So I think coming to the table with just some ideas would be helpful as well. So I'm thinking that I want to move on to, Angela, sorry, go ahead. You had your hand up.
I just thought, Jodi, it's important that we recognize too that disruption isn't destruction, right? None of us are in the work of disrupting the status quo for the purpose of destroying or for the purpose of harming. We're in fact doing the exact opposite. We're there for compassion. We're there for healing and setting folks up for health and wellness. And when we use our relational practice skills and we use the evidence base that nursing rests on to engage positively as disruptors, it's not always about being nice, but it is absolutely always about forward momentum and about future-oriented change. So I think that distinction between sometimes when we particularly engage in activism, we think about burning it down and abolishing it, and it's all got to go. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't actually need to be burnt down. We're not here to throw everything out the window. We're here for positive disruption and not destruction. And the clarity of that purpose is powerful.
Yeah, and I think the clarity of the distinction is powerful. So I appreciate that, Angela. Maybe we, I think we associate disruption and whatnot with something negative when we just need to reprogram our thinking about it, or use the word transformation in that concept. So, I mean, similarly, the next sort of idea is the fact that we are responsible for decisions and care outcomes in a system that's limited, right? Has minimal operational support, to which we have minimal operational input. And so we've talked about how nurses remain hidden from bringing workable solutions to the table, the discourse and the dialect that's required to advance a different way of thinking. And as you said, Angela, it might just be a tweak, but sometimes it's hard for us to get to the right place to suggest such a thing. So how do we as nurses lead a public discourse on how to advance a healthcare model that balances the need for institutional control, because that would be anarchy. That would be crazy if we didn't have all of these checks and balances that the institution is trying. It's not like they get up in the morning as administrators and think, I really want to, mess up everybody's life and reduce patient care. I mean, obviously they're not coming to it with that objective, but how can we as nurses, I really loved your comments, Angela, around how the system is doing exactly what it's set up to do. So how do we impact the people that we need to try to make some of these changes? Angela, would you comment on that?
Yeah, happy to, Judy. And it's a really meaningful question, because I do think that as nurses, particularly again, those who practice in the clinical domain, we do often feel like we are in a helpless, hopeless spot where we don't have that control over decision making. And, I work for an organization that advances nursing, the nursing profession in British Columbia under an umbrella of Unity, so all nursing designations. But really importantly, we also really attend to the reality that nurses practice across all domains of practice. So administration, leadership, research, education, policy, and clinical practice. And I think part of what we need to do as nurses is remember that that manager is not other. They are often nurse too. And that director is not other. They are often a nurse too. And that chief nursing officer is a nurse. And so our systems are absolutely chock full of nurses practicing nursing. And our practices look different because who we care for is different. As a CEO in a province, my job is to care for the health system. That's my patient, just as I would with the mama I used to care for in perinatal services. But we're all focused on the same thing. So I think dismantling some of our us and them language in our own profession is really helpful to understanding that there are commonalities of practice, philosophical orientation, and worldview that we can tap into and hook into in the kinds of conversations we need to have throughout the system. And another thing that I think nursing does really well is we often use that expression, nursing has a unique perspective or a unique vantage point on the issues. We do. And we can offer stories to the public and to our leaders that are different from the stories of any other profession. We can share the human-centered nature of healthcare, what it means to walk alongside another human being day and night. And that is a powerful story. It's an authentic story and narratives that really, really matter. And in particular, they matter with the public, and they matter with policymakers, right? Like I think we often think we need to make economic cases for our presence at decision-making tables or our value in the room. 9 times out of 10, the economic argument isn't the argument we need to make. We need to make a personal, emotional, values and beliefs-driven argument. And we've got that on lockdown. We are excellent at that. If you've ever listened to Sara's podcast, you know the power and the wisdom of nurses, as she and her colleague have so beautifully put forth into our national consciousness as nurses. And then I'll go back again to shared governance. We need to advocate for structures that enable frontline participation in decision making. We used to call those practice councils in some places. In many places, those are now gone. And there is no connection from the experience at the point of care all the way through the structures to that chief nursing officer. And until we have those through lines, those methods of sharing governance and decision making, I don't think we'll get as far as we possibly could when we have that inclusive involvement.
Yeah, so so much to unpack there. I guess I want to say something about the concept of empowerment and nurses, right? First of all, I think we are better together. So this idea that we argue with one another is just like, that's the first rule of being an oppressed culture, is they get you arguing with yourselves so that you don't, you feel less powerful. And I want to talk maybe, Dawn, a little bit about the relationship of that empowerment to the individual, but also collective mental health of our profession. And I love this idea, Angela, of stories. And I think to myself, if a nurse, or in my suggestion, several, came to my office, Jodi, as a manager and said, we want to tell you a story, right? And they tell me the story that reveals or reflects the issue that they actually want to talk about, then I'm in, right? And I mean, I'm totally tied to that emotionally, and I'm far more likely to resonate with it if it's a story than a complaint or a, you know, or an expression of anger or something, because usually those emotions touch us really, really deeply. But Dawn, I'm wondering if you can comment a bit about the relationship to mental health of this idea of us being unified and empowered to speak up for what we know needs to happen in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. There's some really great comments coming out in this discourse so far. And I want to comment on a whole bunch of things, but I'll keep it focused onto the mental health aspect here. But one thing that I've thought about just listening to what everyone has been saying, our new grads come out of the programs with the set of tools that the programs were designed to equip them with. We're talking about, though, using the tools to do things that they might not have conceptualized or thought that they needed to use them for upon graduation. Angela was talking about the relational skills. And nursing has phenomenal, ability to build nurses with solid relational skills. But we use it for that therapeutic relationship with the clients. We don't necessarily use it to navigate political or power structures where we have the skill set. We just need to change the mindset on how to actually attack those types of things. Our new when you talk about mental health and having a certain level of resiliency to navigate these difficulties, and unfortunately the trend across Canadian programs and I'd say Western programs in general is to actually cut out a lot of the personal development and the resiliency building, and to make room for additional acute care experiences, med surge, like the blood and guts kind of nursing stuff, which is really doing our profession a disservice, especially nowadays when we see post-pandemic that real impact of a grinder type of healthcare system. And as the largest professional group, we are the ones getting caught in the gears repeatedly and having the biggest negative consequences and impacts. So we really need to take a step back from an education standpoint and look at not just building competent nurse, but a strong, resilient nurse who takes their own self-care very seriously to achieve any type of longevity in the business. Because we know, 5 years post-grad, when you look at the attrition rates of the nurses leaving the profession, from anywhere from 40 to 80%, depending on the territory and these are terrible and saddening numbers, where the only solution is to actually just graduate more nurses rather than teaching them how to navigate the system or providing them the skill sets to actually achieve some longevity in it. So there is a real trend in healthcare nursing education to actually bring back the recognition to say, your own mental health is very important. We need to develop the skill sets for you to develop strong self-care and wellness attitudes and procedures, so you can take care of yourself, you can take care of your peers, you can take care of your patients, and that this will hopefully give a lot of our colleagues enough of a time to develop that knowledge of the system to actually bring about maybe some positive change. But the trend right now is that we have so many grads leaving before they can actually change a system or even fully understand how the systems are working. So we really need to take a look back at their starting point. How are what tools are they getting upon graduation? And are those the right set of tools necessary for not just the system right now, but the system that's going to be 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road?
Yeah, great points, Dawn. And I think to myself, sometimes we get in this place where we say, you need to do this and you need to do that. And it's almost a bit individualistic. And I think to myself, yes, the nurses do need those skills and they do need to do that, but they also need to be working with the system, not necessarily against the system, because as we've all said, these are systems that are creating what they were intended to create. So Sara, I'm wondering, in your conversations with people all over, the country in different capacities. How do you see that happening? Like where it's not just about the nurses and it's not just about the institutions, but us coming together to create these new ideas?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it really starts with involving nurses, student nurses from nursing school. I think that would be a great idea because everyone goes through their preceptorship, right? In their consolidation in their final year. I think that should be really a piece in nursing school is letting nurses know that this is something that is part of your professional responsibility, that you don't need to sit back. I think part of the issue is a lot of nurses, regardless of how long they've been nurses, are waiting for permission to do things that they know should be done, right? So, in terms of advocacy, in terms of leadership, getting more involved, I think a lot of nurses are waiting for permission from somebody to do these things when a lot of times you just need permission from yourself. And it can be a really scary thing to do, right? Especially when there are no role models doing the things that you want to be doing or you think you should be doing. And that's really part of the issue. And I think we also need to reframe how we look at new grad nurses, right? Because they're no longer nurses that are coming straight out of high school into nursing school. There are a lot of nurses now who are entering nursing as a second, third, even fourth career, and they come with all this life experience and all this maturity. And if we don't take that into account and really encourage them to get involved from an early point, I think that we will continue losing more nurses. And it's really shocking to me actually to hear those stats about nurses leaving within the first 5 years because it's just it's just really sad, you know. I talk to nurses who are still in nursing school and they tell me that they're afraid to start at the bedside. And if they're afraid to start before they even graduate, what kind of environment are we creating for the next generation of nurses?
Yeah, heavy points, you guys. That's why we're here to talk about them. It occurs to me because a lot of times we can have a significant impact in the educational realm. And I think to myself, why wouldn't we institute a change project? Now, we have lots of change projects, but the change project is a collaborative effort between the preceptor and the senior student. So in their final practicum, they are preceptored, but they're working relatively in. What if they had a change project that they worked on with that preceptor so that you're actually teaching that preceptor how to engage with their institution under the auspices of it being an educational assignment? So I just thought of, there's so many ideas that we could come up with, but starting to think a little bit outside of the box around how to do exactly what you had talked about, Dawn. So if we think about preparing the students, as I'm trying to understand, for political activism, how do we do that? Dawn, you're in education. How would you like to see the educational institutions either collaborating with or reaching out to students in a way that help them understand political advocacy?
Yeah, and again, like built that idea of pivoting on existing nursing skills. Like we do a lot of education in the need to be, strong patient advocates. And that same skill set, though, is a strong discipline advocate. And how do you actually then become a strong discipline or a professional nursing advocate, for the profession? So some of it is just shining the light on its potential and the expectation that we as a professional group have. Sarah said it well, we're all leaders or have the opportunity to take leadership roles. But a lot of us aren't ready for it. Even the the veterans or they don't have the skill set or the confidence to move into it. Um, but we have all of the opportunities to do that. So I think first off is just shifting the student's perspective to understand that it's not just an aspiration, but it's an expectation that you become more involved in these advocacies. You also have to then show them the pathways for them as a nurse to actually advance into these decision-making rooms or into these associations that actually start to influence and inform policy, whether it's at provincial levels or national levels. So, and myself as active member of the Canadian Federation of Mental Health Nurses and the current president, we have meetings with Lee Chapman, the chief, nursing officer. We have meetings with Yara Sachs, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. We are, as a federation, getting into these rooms to talk policy. And this is something, though, that the federation had been working on for the last 10 years, just to get into that room. And we had to, though, come up with strategic plans, strategic collaborations with other nursing bodies, with COSN, with the CNA, with other nursing specialties. How can we strategize and work together and leverage each other's capabilities and social networks to actually get into these rooms? And then you share that same mindset of network building, profession building with the students and say, this is the pathway from the bedside into power structures, political structures, and this is how you bring about change. This is how you use your relational skills, your advocacy skills, to not just better patient outcomes, but to better outcomes, for the profession that you're a part of, and to at the same time then lead to bring about positive change. It might not necessarily be to the systems themselves, but it could be how the public perceives health, how the governments perceive health, how nursing is delivered. So you show them the skill set necessary, I think, to achieve the outcomes, and then you show them the pathway that they can achieve to get into those outcomes. I think that would be a good start.
Yeah, I think that's great, Dawn. And Jodi, I'm wondering this pathway, right? I mean, you're right there at the grassroots level. So how do you empower your staff, or how would you like to be able to empower your staff to make the kinds of changes that they need to that need to happen? How can you see that happening?
It's a great question. I think for me, just from what I see, a lot of it really just comes down to the support I think that they feel, not just with myself, but I think amongst their colleagues. That's one of the things that I think we struggle with the most, from what I can see, is there seems to be that sort of off balance of the senior nurses versus the newer nurses, what they support and how they show that support to the staff that are coming on. I would love for it to be just this simple sort of streamline of being like, everybody's on board and we're all going to empower each other and support and make sure that our that our voices are heard. But it is unfortunate, but that is not always the case. And I think that a lot of times it comes down to how that particular nurse or group of nurses feels supported on that unit, or in whatever department they're working on, and they feel comfortable to be able to do that. And I think that that's a continued struggle that I see daily, not only with my staff, but with other staff on other units.
Yeah, and Satvir, I see you kind of nodding your head. Can you talk a little bit about what your first year was like in light of this conversation about seeing things that you're like, I don't think that should be happening, or I'd love to see a change in that. Were you able to do that?
I think I agree with Jodi when it comes to, like, it really makes a difference on the culture you have on the unit. Like the unit I work on, it has like a whole, it's like it has a name in the hospital about being the crazy unit, because we're also like the teaching unit for the residents, like the residents from school. So they are also learning. So oftentimes our point of contact are not the actual physicians, but the residents under them, which creates like a whole new set, because then you're waiting for orders and stuff. But then I am very lucky. The people if it wasn't for the people I work with, like the days sometimes can be so hard, but then the people you work with, they really make a difference. But there is that narrative between the senior nurses and the young nurses. It's also like I feel like that is also very dependent on the personalities of each individual as well, upon how they approach the profession. And it's just like, sometimes you get the feeling, be like, did they just forget when they were new, like, that kind of thing. But then in my experience in the last 1 year, most of the nurses I work with and the ones who have years and years of experience are the most kind. And the one who are like actually good nurses, they're the most humble, kind, and supportive people I work with. And if it wasn't for them, I don't think so I would be this, like, I feeling like there are days when there are like so hard days, but then at the end of the day, I don't feel overwhelmed because of the people I was working with. I still feel like, like, oh, thank goodness they were with me. And sometimes, like, when like, you see at your assignment that it's going to be a heavy day, you already know, but then you look at, okay, who else is with me today? Who's going to be my partner today? That really makes a difference. And I feel like we need to foster that in terms of like, um, kind of giving each other that support and creating that culture and appreciating those senior nurses who are always there for the people who are starting new and, kind of working with them, because we need, and also like not associating, because I see that the newer generation of nurses I'm seeing from like the Gen Z generation, right? Their outlook at nursing is very different from the senior nurses, right? I often read Sarah's podcasts about nursing doesn't have to be a calling kind of thing, right? Like we need to stop guilt shaming them about them not taking it as a calling and just taking it as a profession, but still being good nurses, right? That's another aspect which I feel like is a generational difference too, which sometimes the senior nurses find it hard to kind of wrap their head around. It's like, but then it's really, because then sometimes I look at that, I was like, you know what, like it's fascinating to see, like I wish I could also see it like that, like it's also the new generation of like nurses who are entering, like the Gen Zs and stuff. The healthcare system right now is also not equipped for that voices that they have, because they're like, okay, I'm not doing it. And then sometimes you're like, okay, like that's good too, like that fresh perspective that they bring.
Yeah, I'm going to echo right now Dawn's comment about the dialogue. It's just like we could talk forever about all these things. I just want to shift it a little bit. I know we could stay there, but I want to shift it to another elephant, which is, of course, the workplace conditions. Because the workplace conditions also contribute to this lack of team cohesion. It just puts stresses on everyone, and they're just trying to get their stuff done, and they can be on edge because they also are personal beings and they have a lot of stuff going on in their personal lives, and they come to work and they got this, as as Satvir puts it, the crazy place where they work. And not all places are like that, and there's beauty in the craziness too. There's order in the chaos. But we do have these ongoing vacancies that are making it a little bit more difficult to support new grads in practice because we don't have the seasoned nurses. But it also makes it hard on the seasoned nurses who are still there. And so how do we maintain this workload with a sense of co-responsibility for solving some of these problems? And so the specific question I want to ask you, Jodi, is how do we ensure that physicians in particular, for instance, communicating with nurses on, say, daily rounds or something like that, but addressing nursing concerns in a timely manner, and that's just the physicians, but that's that grassroots level, that if done properly can give this sense of a collaborative, cohesive model. Jodi, what are your thoughts on that? How do you do that in your unit?
Yeah, it's for sure been a struggle. I don't know anything other than neurosciences. This is where I started my career, so I haven't had the opportunity to have that experience on other units. However, I hear about how there really, there isn't a lot of issues in regards to rounding, and the physicians themselves seem to sort of have this groove that they've gotten into where they round at the beginning of the day and, address the things that they need to address. For us, I feel it has been a struggle to sort of find that working relationship with the physicians. We have neurosurgeons and neurologists here. And for me, I would honestly say that I think the most important thing is to really figure out that professional working relationship with those physicians. If there's anything that I've learned, it's that how can you have that professional working relationship where we can set those expectations on both sides. What is it that they require from nursing, and what is it that nursing requires from them? Because I feel that you create that trust and that colleague type of relationship with the physicians. Like somebody had mentioned earlier, and I think it was Sara, nursing is the one that's there 24/7. The physicians are not, yet it's always the families and the patients that want to have that connection with the physician. They hold sort of that key of, their pathway to discharge and their journey of like healing outside of the hospital. But it does always come down on nursing as to how we need to address that and how we can still support the physician, but also be able to say to the patients that, they are rounding. We never have a, specific time. That's one thing that a lot of the patients always do is, so when will your physicians round? And I always have a bit of a giggle because that's just not how it works. We have a very routine and regimented routine nursing, but physicians sort of, my experience, just come and go. I think it's also really important for nursing to, when we do have that connection and that colleague professional working relationship, I think it's also really important to hold them accountable to that. If things are not happening, or they aren't rounding, or they are not seeing their patients in a timely manner, for me, I always encourage my staff to let me know that. Of course, I can see it. I mean, I see when they're rounding. But I think for me, it's also important that then I advocate for my team and I go actually above and escalate that to the department head or the lead of that department. If I've had those conversations first with the physicians, because I always say, I'm never going to go above, but I will have those conversations. But if we're not getting anywhere, I have to take it that step farther. And so I think that's really important too. I think that if we have those working relationships and we can sort of set that standard, I think too, if that's not happening, we all need to have the courage to be able to go and escalate that above just the physicians that are to be rounding on the unit, which is a tough thing. I remind the nurses too, is to remember that, the physicians are our colleagues. We don't report to them. I think there's that sort of hierarchy. And again, I think that's a generational thing where we think, oh my gosh, the physicians are on the unit and we need to do everything. I'll give them my chair. Let me go get you the chart. Oh, I'll call somebody for you. No, listen, we are colleagues and we're here to work together for the betterment of the patient. And so I try to remind them of that too, that when they're trying to advocate, that remembering there isn't a hierarchy there, even though it feels like it is, but we're colleagues and we have the same thing in mind, which is looking after the patients.
Yeah, excellent points, Jodi. As a manager myself, I just ring so true with everything that you said. Sometimes the challenge is, I think, Angela, you said it at the beginning, and it's this idea that the system is functioning exactly as it's set up to function. And I sometimes worry that the system is more set up for physician, maybe convenience, or flow or something like that, rather than actually for patients. Because when patients are coming to managers and saying, when is the doctor going to round, these people have lives, the family have lives, they've got to work, they need to know when they can talk to a physician. So from a governance perspective, Angela, how do you go about resolving that particular challenge, as every manager in creation has been faced with?
Absolutely. And Jodi, your points are so bang on around we are colleagues. We are not subservient. We are not handmaidens. We are not heroes. We are not angels. We are educated professionals with nursing expertise, and we are practicing alongside all the other disciplines that practice in acute care environments. And my team here often gets a little tired of me saying, let's change the language of orders. Let's stop using paramilitary language from 1943 that sets us up to say about ourselves that we implement someone else's order. No, we implement care plans from a multitude of different disciplines. We implement medical care plans. We implement speech language pathology care plans and PTOT care plans and our nursing care plan. We don't take orders. We implement important things for our patients at the center. And I think, there are very viable evidence-based approaches to decentering the ways in which our structures have been created. So for example, around that question of that patient waiting for that physician to round because they're ready to go home and we're waiting for that signature and that person isn't showing up. That's very real. I've lived that. I'm sure all of us have lived that many times. Collaborative discharge practices, again, that center the patient's needs and don't rely on one discipline constantly being present or being forced to show up or being harassed to show up. Because, I feel enormous compassion for my physician colleagues who are often rounding on 80 plus patients across an entire hospital while also balancing their primary care practices or their outpatient practices. We know our physician colleagues are experiencing profound administrative burden, way, way more patients than they can care for, just as we are. And so the issues, are not that physicians have it easy and we have it hard. We all have it challenging right now. And we can create systems that respond to the patient's need at the center and don't rely on a single human being to be the hero or the savior or the discharger or the most educated professional at the top of a hierarchical pyramid. But we have to get brave. And to be honest, that requires legal changes. It requires changes to our legislation, our regulatory frameworks. It requires changes to our education across disciplines, not just in nursing. And it requires system processes to change, like hospital-based systems to change as well. So it's a big ask, but ultimately we are all saying the same thing, which is it needs to happen because physicians are burning out, nurses are burning out, and patients are going underserved.
Yeah, wonderful points. And again, powerful, important for us to sort of reflect on and take back to our own organizations, where we can think about how do we bring people together in this collaborative tone, right? And I would love to carry that conversation on, but I'm sensitive to our time, and so I do want to bring up the environment and how we mitigate all the stress that is in the workplace, and everybody's commented on it. So we know that stress in the workplace is just simply unprecedented. It was present prior to COVID. That it's not like COVID was the reason why we have so much stress. It was all there, but the system just kind of fell apart during COVID. But the pandemic did place a burden on healthcare professionals that hasn't abated. So we have the staff shortages, we have agency nurses without the background or oftentimes credibility, working alongside exhausted baseline professionals. So I think we do have a bit of a flailing morale in a lot of workplaces, not just in acute care. We certainly you know, are experiencing missed care, potential for clinical errors and whatnot. So I just want to center a little bit on how bedside or direct care nurses can work with their managers and administrators to understand and advocate for some of the solutions to patient safety risks that are related to these failing workplace cultures without guilt. And so Satvir, you're coming to us with the most recent and sort of visceral experience of that workplace. So what are your suggestions?
I think one of the key elements, I would say, like from a manager perspective, would be the accessibility of the operations manager or the practice manager, like how accessible they are to their like, you know, the staff that they have. And then also secondly, like, again, that's also like a personality part too, but also like if I'm coming to my manager with a problem, how they're reacting to it. Like, it's just like your answer sometimes is like a textbook answer, which I know you're giving it because it's a part of your job to tell me that, versus when, you know, I don't remember who mentioned it, you know, like you were a nurse too at some point, because, you know, most of the managers I have, they have been nurses and now they have transitioned to management positions. When I don't get that, I'm not just speaking for myself, because we have these conversations with my colleagues, is when I'm coming to my manager with a problem but their answer is a textbook answer, or if you're telling them about like how you're struggling, like they just give you a little pamphlet that the hospital has given to them about the employee assistant program and stuff like that. It's really like, it really makes a difference. I have different managers and I can tell, like when I come, one of my managers, like when I go to her and she listens, and then when we go to her about like a patient or a family member who are being disrespectful to you, right, and they're treating you like, you know, like you're their servants, and like, you know, and then you go to my manager at rehab, I go to her, and that woman, she listens, she goes to the patient and the family, she addresses it, she lays the law down. She'd be like, you are not going to treat my staff like that. My staff were doing this within their scope. She listens to them, but then she would and then I have never had her come back to us, be like, you know, there's this online memes that go around, what could you have done different in that situation? Versus I've had situations where you're like, in another scenario, I'm not going to name names, but like, it's like you go to your manager, they will be like, they listen to you, they go and rest, but then they come back and then they're trying to say, maybe we could have explained to the patient this in a different way. But then I'm like, then the next time I don't even feel like going to them, because I already know either their answer is going to be a textbook answer that they have to give me given what their role is, or it's going to be something put back onto what we could have done different. It's like, so that accessibility or approachability part really makes a difference. Then, you know, then the other thing we already discussed about being proactive, not reactive, and, you know, the like that morale in the workplace, you know, like kind of like doing things that can just not like having those conversations about things, not just because you're obligated to have those conversations, or just like showing that you actually care for your staff. I feel like that's really important, and that makes you want to be there and all that stuff.
Yeah, you know, it's tough. I'll tell you, Jodi's just nodding her head away there or shaking it or whatever. And I get it. It's a tough thing to lead, is this idea of helping everyone deal with, like, as a middle manager, I always just felt so stuck because I knew administration's coming at me from this side saying, you know, no more overtime. You're going to have to figure things out. And my staff are coming to me saying, there's no way we can manage this. We can't handle this workload. The only way for me to address it is with overtime. You know, like, you're caught in this cycle. Dawn, I'm wondering, like, what kinds of pragmatic things can you suggest for managers or administrators that will help them cope with their own stress, and then help them bring their cultures together and raise their morale?
Well, it's funny we use the terms like managers and administrators, but we haven't talked about a leader. Right? Like we have solid managers that are responsible for tasks and operations. We have administrators that are the same, associated for handling specific tasks. But you don't necessarily need strong management or a management skill. Or the manager might not be the right person to lead to a transformational work culture. They may not have the skill set to be able to do that. So some of the pragmatic approaches is to recruit into that middle management, not just a strong manager, but a transformational leader that actually, has the skill set, and work it into the job description, especially if you're coming from a damaged culture, or one that is under high stress, or potentially toxic and needs to be transformed. You need to recruit that right person to manage the aspects, but also to lead the transformation of that culture. So that you need to actively recruit that right individual into it. Now, that's not always an easy thing to do, especially nowadays where we know that there's less and less nurse managers and more non-nursing professional managers that may not understand the nursing culture, or how to transform it. But I think finding, and on the units where you don't necessarily have a transformational manager, you would have a potential leader in the form of some of the veteran nurses or the senior staff on the floor, to bring about some of the transformation from a cultural standpoint, to take the lead and to work hand in hand with the educator and the manager or other senior staff or even junior staff, actually bring about the type of change that you want. But it won't happen unless you have the right people to lead it. And this kind of goes back to some of the earliest conversations about, we all have opportunities to actually move into leadership roles, whether you're a novice nurse or a veteran. It's having the skill set and that fortitude to actually take advantage of that leadership opportunity when it presents itself. And that also then you need the support to actually follow through with any action to actually bring about a positive change. So looking to identify that right individual, whether it's a formal leadership position or an informal leadership position, to take the lead to bring about positive change within the culture, that's a great place to start. And I would just caution, it doesn't always start with the formal leadership. A lot of the times, nurses on the floor can organize and bring about the change themselves if they have the support from the manager. I won't say leader, because if it would be the leader doing it if it wasn't the nurses themselves. But you need someone willing to take the risk to do it. You need the supports in place to make sure that you can push through and bring it to completion. And then you need the foresight to create that perpetuating cycle that once some of the leaders transition out, it will continue to function the way it was intended, or else you do go on that slippery slope and very easily slide back down the hill into dysfunction relatively quickly.
Yeah, that we're right back to the nurses at the bedside, basically, or in the direct care environment, in terms of ensuring that they have a strong sense of empowerment to identify and then resolve their own issues, right? Rather than saying we come to Jodi for everything, right? I mean, we need to turn that around somehow. And so a lot of times in education will be like, oh, you're the new generation. We are just so excited, which we are, to have you here. But it's a lot of laying on of, you guys need to go out there and change everything, right? We're depending on you, that sort of thing. So Sara, you work with a lot of these newer generations and have a sense of what's going on out there. What would they say to this? What would the Gen Zs say to how to make change in the workplace, and whether or not they're interested in doing that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to lead by example, right? So if we're wanting nurses to be more active and more taking on an advocacy role, I think we have to show them the change that we want to see. And so if managers, and I'm going to use the word leaders now, if leaders can show how to do this, I think it would really help model the change we want to see in the newer generation of nurses. The other thing is, I feel in talking to a lot of nurses that there's so much fear and silencing in nursing that we really need to be able to encourage people to be activists and whistleblowers. So we're not punishing people that speak up, we're encouraging them to speak up. So I think there needs to be a big shift in how we kind of incentivize people to want to speak up, because I think we all have this innate need or this want to make things better, right? We went into nursing because we want to help people, but when people do speak up and they experience negative repercussions, it makes them obviously not want to speak up, because who wants to quote unquote get in trouble for trying to do the right thing? So I think also it's helpful for nurses to be more visible beyond the bedside. I think that's something that's come up a lot in this podcast, is that showing nurses that we do have we are needed in spaces beyond the bedside or even in addition to the bedside, right? There are nurses who are CEOs of multi-million dollar companies, right? There are nurses that are working in very non-traditional workplaces, and we're needed everywhere, and we're needed in so many different places. I think that's the main thing. I also wanted to just touch on what Satvir said about culture, right? So culture is obviously something that will make or break a new nurse. And I like to use it of the moldy strawberry. So when you buy a box of strawberries and there's a moldy strawberry, what's your first instinct? It's to take it out, right? You want to take out the moldy strawberry so it doesn't infect all the other strawberries in your lovely box of strawberries. So I think the same thing goes for so-called bad behaviors, right? We really need to address bad behaviors right then and there. So whether it be bullying, whether it be gaslighting, whether it be someone that's creating a toxic environment, we really need to call out these bad players and address the situation before their behavior starts to infect the culture of the workplace. And I think in that way we can make a condition that nurses want to stay in, and having a positive work culture, I think will just naturally lend itself to more nurses wanting to advocate and want to do the things that they know that they should be doing.
Oh, wonderful, Sarah. Beautiful words. Jodi.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to touch really quickly on what you said, Sarah, because I think that's just really important. The other part I want to say though as well is I think we have to let go of the culture of when there is something that is going on the unit level amongst each other, amongst their colleagues, that we need to let go of that verbiage of tattletaling. I don't want to be the tattletale. I don't want to, you know, tell on my colleague, and I always try to encourage them that, listen, we are professional, mature, responsible people to not only ourselves but to our profession. And if you are unable to have that conversation with your colleague in regards to anything, they're uncomfortable conversations for sure, but we're also colleagues, and I always encourage that first. But they do at times have to come to me for me to get involved. And the first thing they say is, I don't know if I want you to do anything because I don't want to be a tattletale. And that is so sad for me, because it's sort of that feeling and those feelings that I think the nurses have amongst each other, that they're unable to have those conversations and then to do something about it. Because again, our whole thing is, we shouldn't accept unacceptable behavior. And if we are going to accept that and not do anything about it, it's just going to continue throughout the whole unit, which again then brings the morale down. So that whole being able to say things and to stand up and use our voice is super.
Dawn, while Jodi's getting back online, you wanted to make a comment about this.
Yeah, just a quick comment, what Jodi was talking about. I think we can all relate to that. It also though has to it is aligned with our conversation about empowerment as well. And I just wanted to say that I have talked about empowerment of the student going into, but I think we could talk about, or just I want to introduce the idea of the role of the professional associations to actually build empowerment in our clinicians that are, practicing, as well as our continuing competency programming to build that in, just to remind our colleagues. Um, this is a profession. There are professional standards, there are professional expectations. One of them is to continue to learn and to grow and to evolve as a clinician. And when I hear that whole statement of, I don't want to be a tattletale, uh, this is not the playground. We are adults. We are professionals. We have the expectation to behave as such. Um, if if you reframe it from tattletaling to disclosing unprofessional behavior, when you reframe it into professional language, oh, it's not tattletaling. I'm just, I'm addressing unprofessional behavior and changing the culture to something positive. Um, it it like that's what I'm trying to say. Like the role of professional associations to work on the professionals, and will change the entry to practice, like the graduates coming in to be hopefully stronger professionals so that they can actually better navigate those type of work environments. But the work doesn't stop after they enter into the practice. You continue to grow and evolve as a professional, and that expectation doesn't change whether you're 1 year in or 20 years into the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela, last word to you.
Well, thanks, Judy. And I want to raise my hands and say, here to Dawn. Professional associations, that is our role, that is our job, is to advance the profession, but also to tackle some of these really challenging narratives that persist within our profession. And, I'm reminded of the limitations of the concept of nice. Nice does not get us where we need to go. Nice does not tackle inequality. It does not attend to racism. It does not attend and meaningfully impact harm. And we have a strong reliance, and I think part of this is the nature of our gendered profession and the history of our profession. We have a history to lean towards nice because we believe nice to be synonymous with being compassionate. And that is not the same. Nice and being compassionate is not. And I'm, again, pulling from my other disciplinary background, I'm reminded of my colleagues who work in conflict resolution and who work in mediation. And there is a reason why peace and conflict are spoken together in the same sentence. We get, as human beings, to peace through the collision of ideas, through conflict. And that is productive. It is generative. It's not something to be feared. And when we are limited or bound by the desire to be nice, we can't get to the hard things that need to be attended to. And I'm reminded of an incredible piece that was published in Canadian Nursing, I think it was earlier this year, on the limitations of niceness and violence and symbolic violence, right? That is a real issue in our profession. And so I would encourage all of us, our listeners, myself as well, when I need moments of courage, to not lean on nice because it is not enough.
Well, that couldn't have been scripted, Angela. So I just, what a wonderful way to end our session together. This sense of recognition that we all have a responsibility to offer transformative ideas, to bring people together, to be role models for a different way of being together. I want to thank all of you for the tremendous amount of time. I recognize that we've gone way over our anticipated timeline, but I wouldn't have wanted to exit at any point outside of this one. So thanks to all of you for all that you do for nurses and in practice for our patients every day. And wishing you all the best.
Thank you.